Sehr geehrte Frau Dr. Bettina Hartwig, sehr geehrte Mitglieder und Gäste des Forums Nachhaltiger Kakao, ein herzliches Willkommen an Sie alle und ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie unserer Einladung zur vorabendlichen Auftaktveranstaltung gefolgt sind. Diese vorabendliche Veranstaltung, um interessante aktuelle Themen zu diskutieren und um den Austausch zu fördern, ist ja mittlerweile lange Tradition hier bei uns im Forum. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass wir sie heute endlich auch mal wieder als eine reine Präsenzveranstaltung durchführen können. Besonders begrüßen möchte ich heute unsere beiden Vortragenden, Neil Judd von ProForest und Florent G. von South Pole. Hier vorne sitzen beide. Schön, dass Sie heute hier bei uns sind. Und nun möchte ich das Wort an Frau Ministerialdirigentin Frau Dr. Hartwig übergeben. Frau Dr. Hartwig ist Leiterin der Unterabteilung Ernährungspolitik im Bundesministerium für Ernährung und Landwirtschaft und sie wird nun als Hausherrin die Veranstaltung eröffnen. Vielen Dank, Frau Hartwig.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau Bahn, sehr geehrter Herr Judd, sehr geehrter Herr G., sehr geehrte Forumsmitglieder, sehr geehrte Gäste. Ich freue mich, Sie heute im Namen des Bundesministers für Ernährung und Landwirtschaft anlässlich der diesjährigen Mitgliederversammlung des Forums Nachhaltiger Kakao hier in unserem Hause begrüßen zu dürfen. Und wenn ich so in die Runde schaue, freut mich besonders, dass die jährlich stattfindende Mitgliederversammlung auch in diesem Jahr doch sehr gut besucht ist. Dieses Jahr stehen insbesondere die Entwaldung und der Klimawandel im Mittelpunkt ihrer Arbeit. Als BML begrüßen wir das sehr, denn die Bundesregierung setzt sich seit langem für den Erhalt der Wälder weltweit als einen entscheidenden Faktor im Kampf gegen Klimawandel, Verlust an Biodiversität und der Erhaltung der natürlichen Lebensgrundlagen ein. Mit knapp 4 Milliarden Hektar bedecken die Wälder noch rund 30% der Erdoberfläche. Vorsichtig geschätzt werden jährlich ca. 9 Millionen Hektar wertvoller Primärwald zerstört, vornehmlich in den Tropen. Bis zu 90% dieser globalen Entwaldung gehen laut FAO auf die Umwandlung in Ackerflächen zurück. Das Thema Entwaldung und Klimawandel spielt daher in den globalen Lieferketten, besonders auch im Kakaosektor, eine immer größere Rolle. Und so spiegelt sich die Aktualität Ihres Jahresthemas auch in der aktuellen politischen Einigung über eine EU-Verordnung zu entwaldungsfreien Lieferketten wider. Diese Verordnung wird voraussichtlich im Juni dieses Jahres in Kraft treten und dann bereits Ende 2024 zur Anwendung kommen. Und sie wird ganz in unserem Sinne dann hoffentlich maßgeblich dazu beitragen, einen erheblichen Teil der weltweiten Entwaldung und Waldschädigung zu beenden. Neben Rindfleisch, Palmöl, Soja, Holz und Kaffee zählt Kakao zu denjenigen Rohstoffen, die den größten Anteil an der von der EU zu verantwortenden Entwaldung haben. Hier gehen wir als BML gemeinsam mit dem Forum voran, um Entwaldung in den kakaoproduzierenden Ländern zu beenden und dem Klimawandel entgegenzuwirken. Ich freue mich, dass Sie uns mit Ihren Beiträgen unterstützt haben, wesentliche Verbesserungen in der Verordnung zu verankern. Und ich freue mich, dass wir unser Wissen in diesem Bereich heute hier auf der Mitgliederversammlung durch Vorträge weiter vertiefen werden. Ich möchte die Gelegenheit auch nutzen, mich bei Ihnen für Ihr bisheriges hohes Engagement zu bedanken. Dies gilt es aufrechtzuerhalten. Und ein besonderes Augenmerk gilt es hierbei darauf zu richten, dass auch in Fragen der Standards bei der Zertifizierung ein möglichst hohes Ambitionsniveau angestrebt werden muss. Hierbei kommt es zentral auf die standardsetzenden Organisationen ein. Und wir wissen auch, wie schwierig das ist. Einerseits muss den Zertifizierungssystemen ermöglicht werden, höhere Standards in Richtung existenzsichernder Einkommen zu verlangen, denn auch die soziale Komponente der Nachhaltigkeit muss berücksichtigt werden. Auf der anderen Seite aber gilt es zu vermeiden, dass die Unternehmen infolgedessen als deren Lizenznehmer abspringen. Und hier wird es wichtig und entscheidend sein, wirklich ein ausgewogenes Maß zu finden. Aber bei all dem sollte es unser gemeinsames Ziel sein, dass die Bäuerinnen und Bauern von ihren Einkommen gut leben können. Gerade die Kleinbäuerinnen und Kleinbauern leiden aktuell unter den globalen Preissteigerungen für Betriebsmittel. Und nun freue ich mich auf inspirierende Beiträge von Neil Judd von ProForest und Florent G. von South Pole zu genau diesen wichtigen Themen. Die Umsetzung der EU-Verordnung zu entwaldungsfreien Lieferketten und den Zusammenhang von Zahlungen für ökologische Dienstleistungen und der Armutsbekämpfung in den Produzentenländern. Ich wünsche Ihnen jetzt einen spannenden und gewinnbringenden Austausch und ich wünsche Ihnen vor allem auch eine erfolgreiche Mitgliederversammlung. Vielen Dank.
Vielen Dank, Frau Dr. Hartwig. Und damit steigen wir dann heute direkt in das Thema ein. Das Thema unserer diesjährigen Mitgliederversammlung ist Lösungsansätze für Entwaldung und Klimawandel im Kakao. Und zu zwei von diesen Lösungsansätzen werden wir heute Beiträge erhalten und diskutieren. Das ist einmal die EU-Verordnung, das hatten wir jetzt ja schon gehört von Frau Dr. Bettina Hartwig. Und ProForest hat mit Unterstützung des BMZ ein Referenzdokument für Kakaoproduzenten und Importeure erstellt, wie mit den Herausforderungen der Verordnung umgegangen werden kann. Und der zweite Lösungsansatz, zu dem wir heute Abend hier was hören, Zahlungen für Ökosystemleistungen im Kakaosektor. Hierzu hat die ICCO bei South Pole eine Studie in Auftrag gegeben, um einen Überblick zu schaffen über Konzepte und Maßnahmen, Fallstudien durchzuführen und um insbesondere auch zu beleuchten, wie Kakaobauern von diesem Konzept profitieren können. Auch diese zweite Studie ist vom BMZ kofinanziert. Kommen wir nun zum ersten Vortrag von Neil Judd von ProForest. Neil ist einer der Mitbegründer von ProForest. Er war über 20 Jahre Co-Direktor von ProForest und ist jetzt Senior-Fachberater. Neil verfügt über umfangreiche Erfahrung bei der Bereitstellung praktischer Lösungen für Nachhaltigkeitsanforderungen, ist Spezialist für verantwortungsvolle Beschaffung in landwirtschaftlichen Lieferketten und zu seinem Hintergrund gehört ein umfangreiches Engagement im Bereich der Nachhaltigkeitszertifizierung, einschließlich der Leitung des größten globalen Forstzertifizierungsprogramms und er hatte auch eine führende Rolle bei der Entwicklung der Zertifizierung von nachhaltigem Palmöl. Neil, thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much also for the invitation to speak. It's a great pleasure to be here. As you've heard, we're right at the start, really, of just trying to understand what the EU regulation on deforestation looks like in practice, and how it's going to be implemented by some of you in the room and many other companies around the continent. And so, as a sort of very modest opening contribution to that, I want to talk about some guidance, as you heard, that ProForest have developed, with specific reference to the cocoa sector. We developed this guidance, I'll just skip on to my first. We developed this guidance in December last year, kind of just anticipating really the final text of the regulation. And what we wanted to do really is really start the process of helping people to understand and therefore implement the regulation in practice. I should say that you will have quite some detail on this topic tomorrow, of course, in your sessions, and some of you will be signed up to the track on the regulation itself. So I'm not going to attempt to get into all of the detail here, clearly. I think that's too much for an evening slot. But what I'll do is I'll basically introduce you to what we've tried to do in this piece of guidance, how it's structured and how you can use it, essentially. I just wanted to recognize, as you heard, the guidance itself has been funded by IKI, the German government international climate initiative. Proforest has a 3-year program across multiple activities, and this was one of them. And I also wanted to recognize that we did do some consultation in developing the final version of the guidance with support from GIZ and TFA, so they're also acknowledged there for you. We couldn't have done it without their support. So let me just make some very brief opening remarks, if I may. Oh, sorry, it's not as sensitive as I thought it was going to be, the clicker. Let me just say a few words about Proforest. Some of you will have heard of Proforest, others not, of course. So Proforest is a mission-driven organization. We're a global organization with bases in Europe, Latin America, West Africa, and Southeast Asia. So we have 4 regional centers. We basically focus on forestry and agricultural commodity products and the production and sourcing of those that delivers positive outcomes for climate, people, and nature. And we basically have 3 ways of doing that. One is to work directly with specific companies, helping them to either produce or source commodities responsibly. So we have a very, very large ranging consultancy offering with multiple companies up and down the supply chain, both in forestry and more in agricultural commodities, including the cocoa sector, of course. We also help actors to work together at landscape level. So in the production end of the supply chain, we work with many landscapes across commodity origins, helping multiple actors come together to deliver positive outcomes. And then if you take that up to the sector level, international sectors, we bring people together in multi-stakeholder forums to work together to find solutions to common problems in sustainability, much like this forum, of course. So, a very brief introduction. Obviously, as you just heard, in fact, the EU deforestation regulation is about to be fully adopted through the various processes very, very soon. There's an 18-month process of allowing companies to get used to the requirements, and so we expect that to be fully in force from December 2024, as you heard. So basically, companies have 18 months to prepare themselves, and so what we're doing now is essentially kicking off that process of assisting the understanding and the practical implementation. So what I want to do tonight, very briefly, is just show you what the operational guidance that we published in December aims to cover, how it can contribute to that understanding and to help the practical implementation. Specifically in the cocoa sector, but of course many of the lessons are common ones. And just to note also that there is an accompanying reference document. You can find both documents on the Proforest website and in multiple other places, I'm sure. The reference document is much more detailed and basically zooms out to look at deforestation supply chains more broadly, actually. So with a broader reference than simply the EU deforestation regulation. Some of you will be familiar with the content of the EU deforestation regulation, so I won't go into detail, and as I said, there will be plenty more to come tomorrow, so just a very few introductory words. Clearly the objective is to prevent products associated with deforestation and forest degradation from being placed on the EU market. So, if you want to place products in 7 sectors, including cocoa, on the EU market, from December 2024. They have to be deforestation free. And also, interestingly, you have to demonstrate that they comply with relevant legislation, which is sometimes overlooked as an equally important part of the regulation, and equally challenging, I'm sure, in terms of practical implementation. So those are the basic requirements. The regulation also lays down some detail around how you do that, and essentially you do that through a process of due diligence. So there's some guidance on the scope and content of due diligence procedures that are required to be implemented. And there's a cut-off date after which deforestation cannot be taking place, which is December 31st, 2020. So as I said, you'll hear much more about some of the detail, I'm sure, tomorrow. Just maybe bear in mind those headlines. Moving on to the guidance document itself, it's not too thick. So I can encourage you to study it. It's relatively modest, and I think you can find it digestible. What it does is it basically offers you a structure of what due diligence looks like in practice, which is a bit more detailed than is expressed in the regulation. Actually, it offers you a generic structure of a due diligence process across these 6 points, which I'll go through quickly over the next 10 minutes or so. And under those headings, it basically seeks to communicate to you what the main requirements from the regulation are and how those requirements can be met and implemented by essentially proposing some practical steps to demonstrate compliance under each of those headings. Also, as I said, just a note, so it just does use this kind of generic due diligence structure. So we didn't confine ourselves only to the language in the regulation. We have taken a slightly broader approach, and we think that this due diligence summary that you can see here should be all-encompassing, and also enables you to think about how to integrate this into wider deforestation-free reporting, because of course many companies now are concerned with reporting on their deforestation-free progress across their supply chains and across their volumes, not just in the EU. So what we do in the guidance is seek to start to demonstrate how a mix of approaches and a mix of measures can be used to demonstrate compliance. And you can see at the bottom there, basically uses a structure of 4 types of measures. So producer country level programs. So that's where the origin country is providing an enabling environment through various measures. As you would expect, and as you heard just now, international and regional certification schemes are going to be key, even though they're not specifically recognized in the regulation. Collaborative approaches and landscape level initiatives, also you could expect to be important, and we might hear some more about that tomorrow as well. And then, of course, there are also company level systems and sustainability programs. Of course, many of the originating companies have their own programs which provide a really good foundation for EU deforestation regulation compliance. So that's the kind of overview of what the guidance seeks to do. And let me just offer you a little bit of detail. So how we can use the guidance to help to understand the regulation requirements and then think about what implementation and compliance looks like in practice. So you'll see when you look at the guidance that it follows a kind of common structure under each of those 6 sections. So what we think are the logical components of due diligence. Basically sets out what the main requirements of the regulation are, so that you can have a simple reference there. And then on the bottom left, you can see it basically goes into some detail on how each of those 4 types of measures could contribute to compliance, essentially, as the building blocks that are already in place for you. All I'm going to do really is kind of offer you that kind of structure for each section. This is a very brief presentation, of course, and I'm sure that there'll be plenty of opportunity tomorrow to get into some of the detail, but I'll just highlight a very few points under each section. First one I'll highlight there is that the first component of the due diligence system that you're required to implement is information collection. Clearly, in order to assure yourselves that you have no deforestation in your supply base, you need a certain amount of information to do that. The most fundamental element of that is the locality of the origin. So basically the locations of each of the farms that are in your supply chain. Which is, you may say, quite a basic requirement, but also very, very demanding when you're dealing with supply chains of hundreds and thousands of small farmers. So there are very specific requirements in terms of geolocalization requirements for farms and polygons of production, essentially. Should also just say, just for reference, that the first three of these 6 sections we have on the screen here are the ones that are very specifically highlighted in the regulation. So that's information collection, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. The next 3 I'll mention shortly, as I said, are not specifically targeted in the regulation, but do seem to us to represent a logical set of steps. And so I mentioned the most fundamental requirement in terms of information collection. What the guidance then does is it basically gives you some interpretation of how each of those types of approaches that I mentioned, the 4 building blocks, can help you to deliver. So in this case, for example, it's saying that certification schemes are going to likely to be capable of delivering the information collection requirements of the regulation. Also, of course, important to note that all of these due diligence requirements are very heavily linked together and should be taken as a whole system. We shouldn't be taking them in silos. There's a lot of linkages and a lot of linkages to be explored, I think, as we think more about interpreting the regulation over the next 18 months. What the guidance then also does for each section is it basically seeks to highlight some of the challenges and opportunities in terms of implementation. So it's more of a commentary really on the regulation. If you take the regulation on one side of your desk and the guidance on the other, you probably would get a reasonable picture. So this offers a sort of commentary on some of the most challenging issues. I mentioned geolocation as an example. One of the implications of that is that almost certainly mass balance supply chains, which are of course a heavy feature in cocoa supply chains, are going to really struggle to comply. If you have an uncertified or a portion of your supply base which is not subject to the information collection requirements around geolocation, you are going to struggle to comply. So there's some challenges there. But in terms of the opportunities, existing identity preserved and segregated supply bases for certification schemes and company sustainability programs are giving you a really strong basis for compliance. So these are the kinds of things that the guidance highlights for each of the 6 elements, essentially. So that's the structure. Hopefully you'll find it useful. I'll just run through the other sections and just aim to highlight a very few points. The second, once you've basically found out where your raw materials are coming from, as I said, not a small task in itself, you need to establish the risk level involved. So what is the risk of deforestation in those origins, essentially? And the intent of the regulation is that you need to assure yourself that the origins, the farms in your supply base essentially have a negligible risk status, is the phrase that's used. So there's a negligible risk of deforestation in your supply base. There is a requirement to do this risk assessment on an annual basis, essentially. So there is quite a burden there to regularly evaluate risk levels in your supply base. The guidance then basically talks about the potential contribution of each of the 4 types of implementation option to delivering on the risk assessment requirements. As some of you will know, the regulation makes provision for the EU Commission themselves to do a country benchmarking system, which will essentially provide the baseline for risk assessment. The Commission will assess risk at least at a national level, possibly at a sub-national level, but nevertheless there is also a requirement for operators, companies essentially, to do their own supplementary risk assessment over and above that. So each of you as operators has to basically take ownership of your own risk assessment implementation. And this is one example where we are hoping and expecting there will be quite some guidance coming through over the next year to 18 months from the Commission on what that's going to look like, what the requirements actually will be in practice, and what's the relationship between the country benchmarking system which will be provided to you and the supplementary risk assessment which you will have to do yourselves. In terms of opportunities, we can hope that, for example, producer country systems will offer an enabling environment in terms of some form of risk analysis, as well as often landscape level and jurisdictional initiatives can also help with that. So by doing their own risk analysis, they can basically support what's going on in supply chains further down. And the third obligatory section of the due diligence system that you are required to implement under the regulation is mitigation. And what that means essentially is that you know where the material is coming from, you have some idea of the risk levels involved. Clearly, if there is any non-negligible risk, you have to mitigate that risk effectively. And so this is really the kind of the heart of the regulation, I would describe it as. You've got to have adequate risk mitigation measures so that you bring your risk levels of deforestation down to a negligible level. And again, what the guidance does is it seeks to evaluate and describe the contribution of each of those 4 types of measures to that process. Again, in terms of very tangible measures, we can expect that certification schemes will be very important and very helpful in mitigating risk if you're sourcing certified products, or at least segregated certified, and also company sustainability programs should also provide you with a really strong basis for compliance in terms of risk mitigation. Some of the challenges around mitigation is you might have hoped and expected that certification schemes, for example, could have been evaluated and even potentially endorsed, but that's not the case. There's no framework as such under the regulation for recognition of certification schemes or any other kind of third-party verification. So the obligation is very much on each operator to demonstrate that you have done your own due diligence, you've assured yourselves that a given certification scheme provides you with adequate risk mitigation, for example. In terms of opportunities, as I said, I think there's a very strong chance, and we would expect that some of the key sustainability certification schemes will offer very strong mitigation. They're obviously all now preparing themselves for making sure they are well aligned with the regulations requirements. And also, as I said, sustainability programs run by companies should also provide some significant safeguards. Thinking slightly more creatively, I think that there are plenty of opportunities at landscape level as well for actors and companies to work together to basically mitigate future deforestation risk by essentially de-risking landscapes in terms of deforestation risk over time. So thinking ahead, that's really a fundamental contribution that landscape level initiatives can provide. So as I said, in terms of the guidance, what we've done is we've identified three other elements of due diligence, the whole due diligence system that you should think about. These are kind of implicit in the regulation, but as I said, not explicitly kind of drawn out. The first of those is monitoring, and I would just highlight that obviously deforestation monitoring on a forward-looking basis is often a key part of mitigating risk. You know, if you can show that you clearly understand where your raw material origins are and that those are being adequately monitored for deforestation, that's a really powerful tool. So I think that that form of monitoring, you know, really strengthens and is heavily linked to the other mitigation measures that we highlight in the guidance. On the other hand, we haven't yet got any kind of clear alignment at sector level in the cocoa sector on sort of common remote monitoring platforms that are seen as the optimal choice and that can be used across the board by multiple companies. So there is some work to do there to compare what's being offered and what represents best practice. Also, when you have monitoring systems, it also implies you need some form of response protocol, because basically if you are identifying deforestation alerts, possible deforestation events, then you need some way to respond to that. And so designing and implementing monitoring platforms requires also that you have these kinds of response protocols. And that's common practice in some sectors, but it definitely needs to be embedded in what happens in the cocoa sector going forward. And just to note, of course, that satellite-based tools, remote assessment tools, are important in really two ways. One is to assure yourself that your origins have not had land use change since the cutoff. So there is a backward-looking kind of element to them as well. But then, as I said, the forward-looking, ongoing remote monitoring is also going to be a critical part of risk mitigation. The next element of the due diligence systems that we highlight is remediation, which is basically means if something goes wrong, if you detect deforestation in your supply base, what do you do about it? Is it possible to remediate it or to undergo corrective action, work with farmers to basically restore them to the supply chain based on corrective measures that they take? And again, this isn't explicitly talked about in the regulation. I guess it's implicit that you're going to exclude non-compliant origins, essentially. But in terms of wider best practice, there's lots of thinking going on about how you help farmers to remediate. So if deforestation is identified in a plot, what are the best steps to resolving that situation, essentially? And the final step is reporting. So obviously there are reporting obligations in the regulation. Essentially, companies have to submit a due diligence statement that essentially their origins are deforestation free and legal compliance. And they also have to publicly report on their due diligence system. So there'll be quite some transparency and reporting around compliance with the regulation. So it will really shine a light on what companies are doing to comply. Okay, and this slide, I'm not meant to see the detail. Essentially, just to remind you that what we do in the guidance is also place EUDR compliance in the wider context of deforestation-free supply chains. So obviously in many sectors, including cocoa, companies in the supply chain are very interested on reporting on their progress on deforestation-free supply chains. And there's a lot of thinking going on about how best to do that, how to define deforestation-free supply chains in a global sense. So obviously the EUDR compliance sits as one element of that, one very specific element with very specific compliance requirements, but within a wider context. And to some extent that's covered in the guidance, but also in the reference document that's much more detailed. So you can find that if you're interested in the wider context. So that's a very, very fast run through the guidance. As I said, what we try to do is help you to understand essentially what's in the regulation and what tools there are to already available to help you to comply. I think that most observers of the regulation would recognize that there are plenty of challenges coming with implementation and compliance. I don't know anybody that's relaxed about compliance, I have to say, whatever sector they're operating in. So there are going to be challenges. There is currently somewhat a lack of guidance, and clearly that will be filled. We're expecting that to be filled to some extent with official guidance coming through from the Commission over coming months. But also, of course, what we're trying to do with this document is supplement that and provide other sources of guidance to help actors in the supply chain comply. The two documents that I've mentioned, that I've talked about briefly here, and that you can find on the website, do exactly that, provide signposting essentially to the building blocks of compliance that are already there, and some thoughts on how those can be improved over time. So there will certainly be a very wide effort across the cocoa supply chain as well as other sectors to both create the enabling conditions and the understanding needed to ensure compliance, I think. So to some extent, the tools already exist, and it's our job over the next 18 months to make sure they fully exist. But also, I would just say as a final point that it's going to be really important to, of course, keep talking to producing countries. And you know, those sector-level initiatives already going on in the origin countries will be absolutely crucial to the enabling conditions for compliance. And then supply chain operators can plug into those as we go forward, essentially. So those ongoing discussions and collaboration on the ground, both with governments and civil society operations, are going to be crucial. So apologies, I covered a lot. What I really wanted to do was just give you a sense of what's in the guidance so that you can hopefully now go and refer to it and use it alongside the actual regulation itself. And of course, as we said, we'll talk much more about this topic tomorrow. Thanks very much for your attention.
Vielen Dank, Neil, für diese großartige Präsentation. Ich denke, die beiden Dokumente, die entwickelt worden sind von ProForest, der Operational Guide und das Referenzdokument, sind wirklich wichtige Dokumente, die gerade unsere unternehmerischen Mitglieder dabei unterstützen können, die Anforderungen, die aus der EU-Verordnung hervorgehen, auch zu bewerkstelligen. Und ich denke, es gab auch viele Hinweise jetzt im Rahmen des Vortrages, die auch für morgen, für die Arbeitsgruppe, wir werden das Thema ja noch mehr im Detail behandeln morgen, auch nochmal interessante Hinweise gegeben haben. Ich möchte jetzt vielleicht ganz kurz nur Verständnisfragen zulassen, denn wir steigen hinterher, nachdem wir beide Vorträge gehört haben, nochmal tiefer in die Diskussion ein. Gibt es Verständnisfragen von Ihrer Seite? Vielleicht sollten wir auch noch erwähnen, Neil, also dass zur Erstellung dieses ganzen Dokuments ein ausführlicher Konsultationsprozess auch dahinter stand. Ne? Ich selbst bin zu mehreren Besprechungen eingeladen gewesen. Es waren auch Konsultationen mit Privatsektorfirmen und so weiter. Vielleicht können Sie dazu noch mal 2 Sätze sagen, kurz? Gibt es Mikro oder wie ist... Ach da, okay, gut.
Yes, thank you. I mean, simply that in developing the guidance, we went through a consultative process, and that basically sought to make sure that the needs of the supply chain were going to be met essentially by the guidance, as well as the interests of other stakeholders. So we had some online events towards, I think, Q3 and Q4 last year, and I'm sure some of you must have contributed to that process. The outcome really is the documents that are now on the website. So those consultation events were crucial, essentially so that we could make sure that the guidance as you framed so that it's most helpful for operators in the supply chain. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Wenn keine weiteren Wortmeldungen sind, dann würde ich gerne jetzt zu unserem zweiten Gast kommen heute Abend, Florent G. von Southpol. Und ich bin wirklich froh, dass Sie heute Abend hier bei uns sind. Fast wäre Ihr Besuch noch gescheitert an den Auswirkungen des Brexits und den Visabestimmungen, die wir nun haben zwischen England und Deutschland. Aber das haben wir glücklicherweise lösen können. Florent ist Senior Managing Consultant für landwirtschaftliche Wertschöpfungsketten bei Southpol. Er ist Agrarwissenschaftler und Innovationsmanager mit fundierten Kenntnissen in der Kohlenstoffbilanzierung von Baumkulturen, hat in den letzten 18 Jahren an politischen Innovationen für internationale Entwicklungsprogramme im Kakaosektor gearbeitet, unter anderem mit Barry Callebaut, Solidaridad, ADM, OLAM, zusammengearbeitet, insbesondere in deren Klima- und Nachhaltigkeitsprogrammen für Kakao in Westafrika vor allen Dingen und sowohl auf Umsetzungsebene als auch auf der politischen Ebene. Und heute leitet er die globale Kakao-Agenda bei Southpol. Vielen Dank, dass Sie heute Abend hier sind bei uns und Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you so much, Betty. Hi, everyone. I'm very, very pleased to be here today and then to have the opportunity to walk you through the work that we've been doing over the last 3 years with ICCO, with financial support from BMZ in exploring the way to definitely develop a framework to implement payment for ecosystem services within the cocoa sector. As you all know, I think we all been looking for solutions to, let's say, reduce the climate change effects, knowing that it's mainly driven by the grounding poverty in the cocoa sector. So it appears very important to find an approach that can both resolve climate change and poverty. And we believe that PES can provide some solution in resolving these two topics all at once. So I think we are all familiar with, let's say, the problem facing the cocoa sector. And then I think they revolve around productivity issues, the access to living income and deforestation. And we know that they are also amplified by the growing climate, water and biodiversity crisis that are facing the cocoa farmers, along with the uncertainty around the permanence of the carbon impact on the ground. So in resolving these problems, I think stakeholders on the ground and companies, they are trying several approaches that are, for the time being, mainly activity driven, because they mainly focus on good agricultural practices. We can say that they are also very much focused on value chain interventions. So as such, they are not really aligned with the global landscape approach. And then we all agree that they are currently scattered and use different approach on the ground. So PS clearly appear as a solution to definitely scale up these the current solutions that are tried at a broader landscape level, and then also implement a scheme which is, as opposed to be kind of activity driven, should be outcome driven, to make sure that we can definitely ensure the permanence of the carbon impacts over the long run on the ground. And then we need to ensure as well that all the intervention that we're implementing should be additional and then avoiding leakage. So in doing so, I think we can be sure that all the ecosystem services that are mainly carbon, water, and biodiversity that will be generated will, let's say, remain permanent over the long term, and then farmers can definitely improve their living income by implementing these schemes on the ground, and also the climate crisis can also be a little bit regulated. So this is what the PS schemes is all about. So it's all about rewarding, I think, the conservation of and the continuity of ecosystem services by putting a price on previously unpriced ecosystems that I mentioned previously. And for the cocoa sector, I think through the work that we've been doing with ICCO, with the support of BMZ, I think we've identified three main type of PS schemes that can be implementing within the cocoa sector. The first one is the on-farm carbon projects, and then they revolve around reforestation and forest conservation projects. And the second one is also around water and biodiversity credit. We realize that generally water and biodiversity credit comes as a co-benefit when you implement sustainability program, let's say in a cocoa sector. So there is the possibility also to valorize this natural capital. And then the last, but not the least, I mean, which is the most important for the companies, is the on-farm PS scheme, which will enable the companies to achieve the science-based target and net zero commitment on the ground by working directly with farmers on the ground through agroforestry practices, tree planting, and in some cases, in Cameroon, for example, through tree conservations on farm. So I will further elaborate on that afterwards. So what are the potential benefits of PS? I think all stakeholders can benefit from PS, starting from cocoa farmers who can improve their income and livelihoods, and also implement some mitigation intervention to curb the incidence of climate change impact, because we all know that farmers themselves, I mean, they are the driver of the climate change, but they are also, let's say, taking the heat of the climate change for their activities. So PS can definitely act as a mitigation approach. And for cocoa companies, is definitely helping them to achieve the commitment around zero deforestation cocoa, science-based target, net zero, and also deliver some low carbon chocolate productions by reducing the carbon footprint of, let's say, the chocolate product that can be sold to the market. And there is also a benefit for countries, because I think by implementing a PS scheme, we can, let's say, support the countries achieving the nationally determined contribution, and also enable them to ensure compliance to, let's say, the EU regulation, let's say, on deforestation-free cocoa, so the European law on importing deforestation, so for instance, and then also help the countries to mobilize climate finance, because this is very important for forest conservation, rehabilitation, sustainable agriculture, including agroforestry on farm, as well as watershed and biodiversity conservation. So, as I said, we'll be working with ICCO in 3 countries, So, and then, I mean, we selected 1 country per continent. That was the choice, let's say, made from by ICCO. And then the pilots will be implemented in 3 countries, so which are Indonesia for Asia, Cameroon for Africa, and Peru in Latin America. And with the funding that we received from, let's say, BMZ, I think we were able to develop the PS framework and now carry out, let's say, the feasibility study in two countries for the time being, because the feasibility study in Indonesia is yet to be completed. So for today, I will present you, let's say, the preliminary result that we had from Peru. And in Peru, I think what we've, the landscape that has been selected over there for the implementation of the PS schemes is a Tokache landscape. It has been selected after a consultative approach with all the key stakeholders over there, because it was the landscape that was, let's say, showing the higher potential to generate extra income or extra revenue for farmers through the implementation of carbon, water, and biodiversity schemes. So these are the three options that we will be, that we are currently exploring as part of this PS scheme. So the first option over there is the on-farm agroforestry and climate-smart cocoa. And then we are targeting 2,000 hectares. And the ecosystem services is carbon, but it will be, let's say, assessed through two carbon pool, which are the emission reduction, and also the carbon sequestration, because I think, I will further explain that later on through the different interventions. And for the second options is around, let's say, the afforestation and reforestation opportunities. So it's basically about tree planting to, do some carbon sequestration on the ground and generate some carbon credits. And the third options that will be tested in Peru is around biodiversity and biodiversity credits. So we will see as well the potential that biodiversity credit can bring to farmers' income. In Cameroon, it's the ground balm landscape that has been selected. And then it's basically a kind of transition area between the forest and the savanna. And then I think over there, we are planning on exploring the three options that will be implemented in Peru. But in addition to these three options, there will be water PS schemes that will be implementing, let's say, around the Sanaga River, because there was a potential over there to work with EDF, which is, let's say, a power company, which is definitely implementing some actions with cocoa farmers over there. I will share further details on this opportunity later on. So let's take a deep dive now into, the results that you can expect from a PS scheme in, Okay, let's take a deep dive now in the result that you can expect from each of the options that I presented. So the first options is about the on-farm climate-smart cocoa and agroforestry. And as I said, let's say the ecosystem services is carbon, and is carbon reduction and sequestration that will be generated through tree planting, good agricultural practices, the use of optimized fertilizer. Even the deforestation-free commitment is also generating some carbon impact, as well as some avoided emission from not cutting the trees on the farm for Cameroon. And there is a transaction that needs to be established between farmers, individual farmers or group, with the cocoa and chocolate companies, knowing that they have the obligation to decarbonize the value chain. So they need definitely to incentivize the farmers to reduce the carbon footprints. So, this is the mechanism that should be used to kind of incentivize the farmers and enable the companies to come up with some low carbon abatement costs by reducing the emission on farm. And I will show you how the companies can do that, let's say building on the set of interventions that will be implemented. So as you can see here, you have the baseline carbon footprint that was assessed in all these countries. And then by implementing all the different practices that are listed there, you have in the green bars the potential carbon impact that can be generated from all these interventions, encompassing the reduction and the removal, so the tree planting. And as you can see, in Peru, for instance, there is a potential to generate around 13,000 ton of CO2 per year, assuming the 2,000 hectares that we have for these pilots. So this is huge, and if you monetize this carbon, it can generate some additional revenue for the farmers. So we show you afterwards how this translates in additional revenue for farmers. And it's the same thing for Cameroon as well. So we have the same set of interventions. The only one difference that in Cameroon, there was a trend towards farmers, whereby farmers were cutting down trees, because for people who know Cameroon already, they know that there are some farms that are highly shaded. There are a lot of shade trees, and farmers, instead of planting trees, they tend to cut down some trees. I mean, to improve the productivity on the farm, because we all know that the shade trees are competing with the cocoa for the nutrients. So I think we believe that it will be also important to incentivize farmers for keeping those trees on the ground and planting additional trees. So this is another carbon pool that we had for Cameroon. And how this translates into, let's say, revenue for farmers, as you can see down here, clearly by comparing the marginal costs, including the opportunity costs for the farmers, to the benefits that are generated by the implementation of these PS schemes, you can clearly say that the benefits outweigh the costs, and translate into 30, I don't know if, where can I put the spot here? The light, 37%, as you can see here, 37% extra revenue for the farmers. So it means that by implementing this on-farm PS scheme only, there is a possibility to generate 37% extra income for the farmers, out of which you have, let's say, the contribution, the valorization of the carbon impact that I showed previously. So this carbon impact, if you valorize it and then you monetize it, it's around, let's say, $441. And then you take into account as well the yield gains and the subsidy that need to be provided to the farmers to implement those practices on the ground. So in Cameroon, there is a possibility, in Peru, there is a possibility to generate this 37% extra revenue for farmers by only implementing this on-farm PS scheme. In Cameroon, I think the extra revenue is a little bit low. It's around 8%. But if you see in absolute term, I think you have an extra revenue of 451, let's say, dollar per household. While in Cameroon it was around 400. In Peru it was around 441. But the only one difference is that the baseline revenue for farmers in Cameroon is slightly high already. So that's why the extra revenue is only at 8%. But clearly, there is an extra revenue for farmers. And one interesting finding from our study as well, because it's anecdotally agreed that, I mean, there is a link between poverty and carbon footprint, but we were able to demonstrate through the study that I think, I mean, farmers who are below the poverty line tend to have a higher carbon footprint compared to farmers who are rich or above the poverty line. So there is a possibility, I think, if you lift out farmers out of poverty, you can, by way of consequence, reduce the carbon footprint as well by 28 to 30%. So this is an interesting finding that we had, because you can see all the key drivers, and of which the most important one is the land use change, because the poor farmers tend to deforest more, and then let's say to kind of do an extensive production system compared to the rich one who have more means to do a little bit of intensification on the plots. So that's for the first option. And for the second option, about the carbon sequestration and tree planting, I think, the sellers are more or less the same, the farmers and the farmer groups, and the buyers could be the cocoa and chocolate companies operating within the area for the net zero commitments. And also those carbon assets can be directly sold to the voluntary markets. So, and there is let's say, a strong business case for project developers as well, because this scheme comes with a positive ROI for project developer ranging between 4 and 80% of return of investments. And in terms of benefits here, you can see that these options, so the reforestation is generating 12% extra income for farmers based on the share of revenue that they can get, around 144 USD, compared to 2% in Cameroon, where they are generating around 133, let's say, USD per household. So moving on to the third options around biodiversity. As I said, I think let's say the ecosystem services over there is biodiversity credit, and you can, let's say, obtain it through 3 activities that are forest conservation, live fences, and protective strips. And it's also showing the same pattern like the reforestation one, coming with a positive ROI for project developers as well. And it's generating around 13% extra revenue per household in Peru, and in Cameroon is still around 2%. So moving on to the fourth PS scheme around water. As I said, there is a quite interesting case over there in Cameroon, because there is a EDF who is kind of building a water plant over there, and then they are compensating farmers for them to, let's say, reduce the level of sedimentation in the water, because they can definitely reduce the operational costs by reducing the amount of sedimentation. So they are working with cocoa farmers, providing them with the support for them to adopt good practices such as agroforestry system, reforestation, forest conservation, and let's say live fences near the riverbank or the riparian zone. And in return, I think they are willing to pay some, let's say, water incentives to these farmers. So these schemes also come with a positive ROI, and then it can basically generate around 2% extra revenue for farmers. But the most interesting thing is like there is an opportunity for partnership with cocoa companies operating in the area, because EDF is not interested in the beans, but they are providing some support to the cocoa farmers. So there is an opportunity to do some co-financing of some sustainability activities over there and joining forces to increase farmers' revenue. So I think this extra revenue can also increase over time if all the stakeholders agree to do so. So, in summary, what we have in Peru is the result from the feasibility study showing that the PS scheme can generate between 12 to 37% increase in household income. It has a significant impact on carbon assets and biodiversity credits generation. And also, we have the strong buy-in from several partners that we already engaged during the feasibility study to co-implement these projects on the ground. So just to list a few, you have ICCO, all the government agencies, producer organization, cocoa companies, and NGOs that we met during the feasibility study and who are, let's say, willing to implement it with us. And it's the same as well in Cameroon. Sorry, it's not working sometime. Yeah, it's the same as well in Cameroon. And then over there, I think what you can see here, it has the potential, the PS scheme has the potential to increase the household income by between from 2 to 8%, and have a huge potential to generate some carbon impact. And also the list of stakeholders that you can see here have been actively engaged during the feasibility study, and they are willing to become co-signatories of the proposal that we're going to develop. So as you can see, the next steps that we have for this project, because we are currently at the feasibility study level. So the next step will be to co-craft the proposal to be submitted to potential donors. And then we are definitely looking forward to testing this pilot again with the support from BMZ, because when we see the potential impact on, let's say, farmers' income, is worth giving it a try on the ground. So there could be pilots starting in 2024, and then that could potentially end in 2030 to align with the milestones for the climate impact. But to do so, we believe that we need to learn from the feasibility study. And one of the key learning is that PS is not a magic bullet for poverty reduction, but it needs to work in synergies and additionality with existing programs. So it's important for programs like GISCO and let's say all the cocoa sector initiative to integrate PS as an approach for the let's say the valorization of the natural capital on the ground. And they also need to set concrete targets, climate target, because if you take GISCO, for instance, do we have a kind of climate target that the program wants to achieve over time? Because, that's what the PS scheme is about. It's kind of, let's say, trying to demonstrate the carbon impact over time. So a program like GISCO can do that. And then also we recognize that the cocoa sector is not fully equipped to do all the carbon accounting and then all the monitoring, all the measurements that comes with such a PS scheme, because I've shown the carbon impact, carbon footprint. So we need to build the capacity of the cocoa companies and then all the stakeholders on the ground to be able to fully grasp the measurement that are needed for the implementation of PS schemes. And we've also noticed that it's very tricky for PS schemes, I think, to be implemented if you don't have a long-term commitment from the buyers. I've mentioned that because this PS scheme, the ecosystem services can be generated, but if you don't have a buyer, let's say, in front of these ecosystem services, I think the system will stop. So it's very important to identify upfront the buyers, so to secure PS deal upfront with the buyers, and to make sure that when farmers do all the hard work to generate the ecosystem services, there will be someone to buy them. And also develop this collective action MRV system on the ground to make sure that we can measure these impacts. Last but not the least, you have also the fact that all the companies, all the stakeholders on the ground, they are struggling because, they can implement all the climate actions, but they are not certain that they can claim this carbon impact, because in some of these countries, you have some schemes like the FCPF scheme that is implemented by the country. So you need to make sure that you set up some, let's say, the government outreach and advocacy to make sure that there can be some system in place to share these benefits with the companies willing to invest in the implementation of PS schemes on the ground. And I will definitely try to stop there, but we need to acknowledge that because we want to improve the living income of farmers, but we need to recognize as well that poor farmers sometimes are struggling to get all the resources that are needed to implement the practices that we are supposed to generate the ecosystem services. So we need to provide some upfront financial support to those poor farmers for them to, first of all, be able to generate these ecosystem services, and then also to encourage the participation of companies through co-claiming, because I think when you generate an emission factor, several companies can claim the same impact by working, pulling together the resources. They can co-claim this impact. And last but not the least, I think we can also see at the sectoral level through public-private platforms such as GISCO, how this kind of, let's say, financing can be mobilized to implement PS schemes on the ground. So PS is just, let's say, is the starting stage in the cocoa sector. And then we believe that there is a possibility to do some learning by doing and some small experiments. So we strongly encourage you to join us in testing this pilot on the ground and making it happen for the farmers on the ground. So thanks so much for your attention, and then we are available for any follow-up question.
Ja, vielen Dank, Florent. Ich glaube, das war eine sehr interessante Präsentation. Vielleicht nochmal zum Hintergrund. Also die ICCO hat diese Studie beauftragt, die im Augenblick durchgeführt wird. Wann können wir eigentlich damit rechnen, dass sie veröffentlicht wird, Florent? Wann können wir ungefähr damit rechnen, dass die Studie veröffentlicht wird?
Yeah, as I said, I think we've already completed the feasibility study for Cameroon and Peru, and we yet to complete the one for Indonesia. So the 3 studies will be very likely published, by June, July. So we still need to, let's say, agree upon the release with, together with ICCO and the BMZ as well.
Ja.
Yeah.
Und die nächste Phase ist jetzt, diese Projekte zu entwickeln, und die Projekte, also Hintergrund dieser Projekte ist wirklich Möglichkeiten zu finden, wie die Kleinbauern von den Umweltdienstleistungen profitieren können. Ne? Denn wir haben im Augenblick ja die Situation, dass das noch nicht gang und gäbe ist, dass wirklich die Kleinbauern dann auch von diesen Umweltdienstleistungen profitieren. Oft profitieren die Länder oder andere Akteure, aber dass die Bauern wirklich davon profitieren, da gibt es, glaube ich, noch sehr wenig Beispiele. Und das steckt genau hinter diesen Projekten. Und für diese Projekte wird eben auch noch ist Finanzierung notwendig. Das war jetzt auch im Consultative Board der ICCO, wurde da auch noch mal ein Aufruf gestartet an mögliche Geber, ob da nicht Möglichkeiten bestehen, diese Projekte jetzt auch zu finanzieren. Das kann sowohl von der öffentlichen Seite kommen, als auch vom Privatsektor natürlich. Und auch Gemeinschaftsfinanzierungen sind hier natürlich sehr willkommen. Das nochmal als Hintergrund. Ja, gibt es dazu jetzt noch konkrete Fragen zu dem Vortrag oder Beiträge? Also wir können auch gleich einsteigen in die Diskussion oder in Beiträge. Torben? Ihr müsst jetzt ein bisschen aufpassen. Ja, ja. Ja. Und zwar zu beiden Vorträgen jetzt. Maybe you could come here, both of you. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Florent. I've got a question to your presentation. I'm Torben Erbrath, member of the board of GISCO, representing the industry. I think in our sector, it's well known that you only can reduce your carbon footprint of chocolate or cocoa and chocolate products if you reduce it in scope 3, which is the cocoa production.
Yeah.
Mainly.
Exactly.
It's also other parts of agriculture, like, for example, also, of course, agriculture regarding cows and so on. But here we are talking about cocoa. It's very important to reduce it. But we have the difficulty, if you look into different databases and reports, there is no real carbon footprint or valid carbon footprint of cocoa available. We have different databases, we have different reports, and I just want to know, how did you calculate or what is the basis of this? Yes, the CO2, the carbon footprint of cocoa in these two countries. Is there a methodology which is supervised by ICCO or whatever? Because at the moment, currently, we have different methods, different databases, and so it's very difficult to see or understand or prove if these are real data or figures. So this is my question: how did you calculate it, or what was the basis?
Great, thanks so much for the question. That's a very good question. So I think, as you might know, the best practice in calculating the carbon footprint is definitely by relying on primary data on the ground. So, thanks to the funding that we received from BMZ, we've conducted some data collection on the ground with a sample of farmers in Cameroon, Peru, and Indonesia. That's why the Indonesian study is still lagging behind, because it took a lot of time to complete the data collection, but the data collection in Cameroon and Peru was completed. And then I think the data was computed as well using the guidance from the GHG protocol. So the GHG, the new GHG flag protocol that has been used, as you can see here, is clearly, highlighting, the way the data should be, computed, because we are clearly separating the reduction potential from the removals, because you cannot net them. And then we also agree that the avoidance is not yet validated by the GHG protocol, because I think there is no guidance in place now on how to account for these, avoided emission from the trees that farmers were very likely to chop down. But we believe that there is a strong case to advocate, because I think one thing is that farmers are planting trees, and it's very good. We can definitely incentivize them for that. But in countries like Cameroon, where you already have a very, very high shade tree density, there is the reverse trend, whereby farmers are now tempted to chop down the trees to make sure that they have a kind of optimal density that can help them increase the productivity of cocoa, which is the main, let's say, crop that they are looking at. So I think, to respond to your question clearly, everything is based on primary data, and then it follows the rules, let's say, established by the GHG protocol, except this carbon impact here for the avoidance. And this is why, in estimating even the carbon impact for Cameroon, we excluded this avoidance. You can see here, it's excluded from the calculation because it's not yet validated by the GHG protocol. And maybe adding to that, I think you also have the authoritative, let's say, database, which is the World Food LCA database, which is providing the carbon footprint for several, let's say, commodities. And then I think they have some values for Peru. So you can definitely see how these values that we currently have compare to what they had in the World Food LCA database. And then I think we clearly noticed that they were, from the baseline perspective, within the same range. And then we kind of calculated the potential reduction ourselves, building on the rules established by the GHG protocol.
Ja, vielen Dank, Laurent. War die Antwort damit beantwortet, Torben? Die Frage?
Thank you. Yeah.
Ja. Weitere Fragen, Kommentare, Anmerkungen? Oh, da hinten haben wir einiges. Also, ja. Bitte Mikro. Hier.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. Samuel Knaus from Elucid Social. Actually, along the same lines, so a lot of the additional income, if I understood correctly, is coming from the carbon credit valorization. So mostly methodological question, what were your assumptions on the time frame until which you can valorize the credits and the underlying, like, a price per credit that you assumed?
Great.
Vielleicht nehmen wir noch die zweite Frage dazu.
Yeah, can I take this one?
Two together.
Okay.
Sorry. My German is not good enough, sorry, I didn't understand. Yeah. My name is Alberic Potier from the CSOs in East Coast platform. Yeah, related to what was just asked, and on this slide, you have very immediate concrete measures, such as pruning, mulching, compost, but actually your biggest carbon removal gain is a simple commitment from the farmers. Over how many years is it, and what are the mitigation measures that you plan to have to ensure that you mitigate your risk of non-permanence and the fact that at some point trees might still be cut?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Addressing the first question, thanks so much for the question. And then I think in the report you will have, let's say, the full grasp of, let's say, the crediting period, which is used for the different schemes that are currently presented here. But I think you need to keep in mind that the crediting period might be different from one scheme to another. So I think for the on-farm carbon valorization schemes that we've used, I think what we've used is like there were two accounting systems in place, and one which is, let's say, for the reduction on farm, it has to be done on the annual basis because we know that the reduction is happening every year normally, and as reflected by the roadmap. And for the removals, because it's about tree planting, so over there, I think we've used a 30 years crediting period that we have annualized afterwards to show it the value here on the roadmap, because it's compared to a carbon footprint, which is also on a per annum basis. So this is for the on-farm scheme. So when you move to the second scheme, which is, let's say, when you move to the second scheme, which is, sorry, it's not working, the reforestation one, yeah, over there, you apply again this 30 years, let's say, crediting period, because it's also about carbon sequestration from tree planting. And I think for the biodiversity, it's a system that is currently being developed by Southpole, and then normally we have a cycle of 15 years, which is considered here to be able to, let's say, detect the minimum effect of biodiversity on the ground. So I think you have 15 years, which is there. But once again, to be able to estimate this benefit, we estimate the total potential over the full cycle, and we annualize it because we wanted to compare it with, let's say, the annual household incomes of the farmers. So, yeah, all this information will be provided for sure in the feasibility study report. And responding to the second questions, I think the mitigation of risk of non-permanence, that was the question, if I understood it correctly. I think, normally is definitely embodied into the payment itself, because I think the payment is definitely is performance-based. So meaning that if the farmer stop delivering the ecosystem services, automatically the payments stop as well. So it means that normally, I think the risk, there is a risk management system because everything is performance-based. And as long as there is no continuity of the delivery of the ecosystem services, there is no payment as well. So this is the paradigm shift, which is definitely helping to, let's say, manage this risk and make sure that we maintain, let's say, this the delivery of the ecosystem services, and we link it, let's say, to the payment. Because if you take one case of some of the programs that people were implementing on the ground that were most of the time activity driven, I think you could have the case where the farmer will plant the tree, collect the money for the ecosystem services, and go and chop down the tree again and go somewhere else, to plant another tree to collect some money. So that's why this system definitely, as part of the definitions here, is definitely taking care of, all the risks that are there. And in addition to the permanence, you have also the leakage, because we want to make sure that there is no displacement of this environmental degradation somewhere else. So, yeah, I think you will find your answer in all the mitigation risks are within the key principle of the PS itself.
Friede?
Deutsch oder Englisch?
Egal.
I have two questions which are somehow combined. In the deforestation legislation, you mentioned that for companies to prove that they are not affected by deforestation, they have to localize their farms. You have to polygon the farms. I've heard that the costs for this came down massively in the last years and are quite low per hectare or per ton nowadays. But wouldn't we need that for the systems we heard about here, the PES, because you need to also to polygon them to find out how much impact they have. That's one question. And the second one concerning your cost calculation, I have visited never a PES scheme, but some agroforestry schemes. And the highest cost factor by far was the training of a farmer to go from full sun to agroforestry, because they got trained so long, cut down trees, plant more cocoa trees, monoculture. Now you have to reverse this effect. We have the same problems in Germany, but who is paying this? Because this is a massive cost.
Okay. You want to take the first one?
I think it was mainly for you, Florent, but you're right, of course, that if you look at most companies' supply chains, it basically takes in the whole range from very direct supply chains where you have very good visibility of farmers. So you tend to have a population of farmers, maybe tens of thousands, where the polygons are mapped. And so within a company's sustainability programs, yes, you'll probably find that well above 80% of the farms are already mapped. They're well down the route to complying with that requirement. But then, of course, they also have a very significant indirect supply chain, typically, which is not yet mapped. And so that's going to be the problematic part, of course, in terms of EUDR compliance. But I think then I can hand it to you, Florent, because
Yeah, sure.
That's the link.
I think this one is still working normally. Okay, yeah, so I mean, addressing the first question, do we need to polygons all the farms as part of PS schemes? The answer is yes. Yes, because as we presented in most of the schemes, I think, I mean, farmers need to demonstrate the right to the land tenure or having the potential to obtain the legalization of to the land. And the starting point to demonstrate this, let's say, ownership of the land is the mapping. So we believe that it would definitely be part of the implementation of the scheme. And in Cameroon, for example, we relied, I mean, to identify the potential numbers of farmers who will be part of the program. We rely on the farmers that have been already mapped by CICC. So they are the one who will be part of the program. And moving forward, any farmers who is, let's say, I mean, kind of interested in participating within this program will have this as a precondition to map his farm. Yeah, so yeah, this is clearly there. And responding to the second question, who is paying for the cost for tree planting, if I understood it? Training, sorry, okay. Who is paying for the cost for training? So as part of this study, clearly training has been identified as a transaction cost because it's not definitely directly, let's say, related to the marginal costs that need to be incurred by the farmers. So it's identified as a transaction cost and then a transaction cost. And for us, I think what we were kind of, let's say, thinking about as part of this study is definitely to make sure that there are some parties who could be interested in supporting these transaction costs. Because as I mentioned in the call for action, we said PS is very, I mean, there are a lot of poor farmers who cannot afford definitely to, let's say, pay the cost for the implementation of the practice on the ground. So you cannot ask them to pay for their own training again. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's already part of these costs that need to go within the transaction costs for the implementation of the scheme, but they are not supported by the farmers, and they could be supported by all the development partners who might want to join the implementation of these schemes on the ground. So we already have these figures well documented in the feasibility study for the training, and then it was around, I think, 40 to 50 USD to train one farmers on a per annual basis for all the different practices that has been identified there. So yeah, it's part of the transaction cost, and then they are being compared to the cost that will be incurred by the farmers.
Thank you for the presentation. Evelyn Bahn, I work for the German NGO Inkota. I would be interested to understand better what is the price the farmer gets for fulfilling those activities. Do they get paid an extra premium, an extra price, because they deliver a service, as I understand? So what is the added benefit for them?
Thanks so much for the question. So I think this is clearly, I don't know, where can I, the red spot or something? Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I think this has been clearly demonstrated through this, the green bars here, because this is, as you can see here, is the added benefit from carbon valorization. Because in the previous slide, we showed the carbon impact that farmers can generate on a per hectare basis. And then if you valorize this carbon impact, so applying the unit sale cost for the carbon reduction, applying the unit sale cost for the removals, this is what you get as the additional. Sorry. This is very sensitive. So this is what you get as, okay, let's take this as, so this is what you get as, let's say, the value for this, the implementation of the carbon impact that is generated by the farmers. And on top of that, you have also the added benefit from yield gains, because farmers are implementing practices such as, let's say, pruning, and then it's well documented in the literature that pruning can bring about, let's say, more than, around 15 to 30% increase in yield. And then, because this is one practices that farmers are implementing as well to reduce the carbon impact, so we did valorize the yield gain from the farmers. Here, which is generating around 157 USD. And on top of that, we said, okay, because the farmers don't have the, let's say, the resources to implement these practices, if you want to pay them net of the opportunity cost, because all the opportunity cost has been assessed here, you need to subsidize the cost for the implementation, because you have this cost for implementation here, and from this cost, we deducted the benefit that farmers already have in terms of yield gain. So, because we say, okay, you are doing these practices, but as a result, you're already getting a yield gain. So we deduct it, and we pay you only, let's say, the extra cost as a subsidy. So that's what we added as well to the benefit of the farmers. So the benefits is made up of 3 items. One is the carbon value. The second one is the yield gain, and the third one is the balance, which is needed for the implementation of the practices on the ground.
This is still potential, it's not in reality.
I think because they are based on primary data, because everything you see here is based on data that we collected on the ground from the farmers. So it's clearly the feasibility study to show the potential, but it should be close to reality, because it's the data that are coming from farmers. It's not something theoretical, because we collected the data, and then it's by interpreting the data that we get from the farmers that we go to this information. So they are not that theoretical, because they are based on actual data collected on the ground.
Genau, Entschuldigung. Ich glaube, dann schließen wir diese Session hier, denn ich glaube, wir sind alle hungrig und das Buffet wartet draußen schon. Und es besteht ja gleich auch noch viel Möglichkeit, weiter zu diskutieren.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Wendy Arenas. I come from Colombia. I work with Alisos. I have a question, two questions. The first one for you, Florent. Did your study include anything concerning agroforestry arrangements, or only just cocoa trees in monoculture? And if so, how do you measure it? And it becomes very difficult to learn carbon sequestration when you have a lot of arrangement of other trees. And I would like to go, if you have any information around that. And my question regarding the EU regulation, is there any possibility of having an incentive towards agroforestry systems as part of the mitigation, or maybe the landscape approach? Because it's a strategy that has been promoted for the last years, but it doesn't appear anywhere on the EU regulation. It would be interesting to know if there's a possibility or a chance to see it pop up.
Okay, I can take the first question. I think, it was around the agroforestry arrangement. So I guess it's, around the planting density and then the type of shade trees that are, let's say, envisioned as part of the agroforestry scheme on the ground. And all these information have been collected during the feasibility study, because we did some tree counting operation on the ground to see what is the baseline number of shade trees that the farmers already have in the farm, and what is the, let's say, planting system that is already in place, which can be upgraded through an agroforestry system. And what we found, for instance, in Peru, is that I think the number of shade trees, the baseline, is currently very low. And farmers are kind of, let's say, keen to increase the number of trees. And then we asked them how many trees they were willing to plant more, and then the planting system that they were envisioning. So in Peru, for instance, I think the number of shade trees was, let's say, around 12 in average per hectare. And then they were willing to plant 110 trees per hectare. And the system they wanted to use was to do some live fences around the farm, and then increase the number of trees within the cocoa farm from, let's say, the 12 that I mentioned to 30. So there will be a ring of 90 trees, and then probably inside 30 trees to increase the numbers, so that they don't have any significant impact on the productivity of the cocoa. And also, I think the farmers were asked what kind of tree species they wanted to be, integrated in the agroforestry system. So those are the tree species that we use to assess the carbon potential. So we use the data, allometric equations and everything, to calculate the carbon potential that can come from the tree species that have been selected by the farmers themselves. So I think this is how we came up with the different figures. In Cameroon is another story, because there were different systems, because as I said, this landscape is a kind of transition area between the forest and savanna. So over there you have, different type of agroforestry system that could have been implemented, because when you are, for instance, in the forested area, there are a lot of shade trees already. So you need to make sure that, I think, you work with farmers for them to maintain these shade trees already in place, because there were this trend of them chopping them down to limit the competition with cocoa. But when you are in the, let's say, area here where the shade trees were, the shade tree density was very low, I think, yeah, there was a possibility for them to plant more trees, and we use the same system. Okay, sorry. I think it might be time for the buffet, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yes, just a quick word. Thanks for the question on incentives. And the short answer is no, there's no provision for incentives as such. I mean, of course, those kinds of incentives are implicit in a lot of company schemes, but it's not really covered by the regulation. I would just make 2 points. One is that the regulation does talk about the fact that operators should evaluate the impacts of compliance and basically support compliance amongst their supply chains, including for smallholders. So there are some warm words about supporting compliance and focused on smallholders. So that's there, but it's not a requirement. There's also a provision for a review period so that the Commission and EU stakeholders can review any impacts of compliance over time. So plenty of people, of course, did argue for those kinds of things to be in the regulation, but they're not currently there. So there's no explicit linkage to things like incentives, unfortunately. Thanks for the question.
Dann noch ganz schnell die beiden, also Lisa bitte noch einmal und Frau Elvers vielleicht zusammen hintereinander und dann, genau.
Yes, thank you, Lisa Kiewe from the BMZ, also member, BMZ is member of the GISCO board. So yes, BMZ was really enthusiastic about financing this study to ECO. I think it's a value contribution. If I see this 37% in Peru, that's really impressive. Very, very interesting, of course, is the debate between supply management and alternative income streams via PES. So do we increase the amount of cocoa? If we hear now, here it might be an incentive with pruning to contribute to a higher amount of cocoa, or shall we more set on the, let's say, payment stream, which is not tied to a production, the quantity of production. So I think this is why we financed this study, and we really want to trigger this discussion on we support this discussion within the Sustainable Cocoa Initiative on the EU level. We are very close and very engaged there on the level of ECO and of course in GISCO. And not to forget to mention our broader approach in BMZ since last year, since our G7 presidency. We call that Compens Action. It's an initiative to provide compensation for farmers worldwide, not only in cocoa, but of course it's very, very ambitious. It's a start and fruit for thought. So I leave that there. Thank you very much.
Yes. Silke Elvers from Lübecker Marzipanfabrik. We are a small chocolate company. Just a short question, because I know a bit the situation in Tokache. I wondered a bit about the very, very low baseline revenue from cocoa, which was found over there, especially in comparison with Cameroon. Just a short question on that. Was these because these were very young cocoa plantations maybe, or what might have been the issue on that?
Okay, I think the low baseline revenue in Tokache was linked to several factors. One of which was the average farm size of the farmers that was low compared to the one in Cameroon. And then the second one was also the price, because calculating the income, what we've done is like I can share with you the approach that we used. We calculated the household income building on the revenue from cocoa, because we had this question in the questionnaire that has been addressed to the farmers on the ground, asking what is the share of your revenue coming from all your different sources. So they mentioned cocoa, they mentioned food crops, and then we had this share which was let's say kind of split, I mean, in the scorecard of 100%. And then when we had the revenue from cocoa divided by this share, it gave us the total revenue per household. So everything was linked to the revenue from cocoa normally. So it's normal that if you get, let's say, farmers with lower farm size and farmers with lower price, because I mean, I can I cannot clearly remember the price of cocoa in Peru, but it was lower compared to the one in Cameroon. It was around, I don't know how many soles, but it was a little bit lower compared to the one in Cameroon. So when you add up all these two factors, you end up with, let's say, a revenue which is low compared to what we had in Cameroon.
Ja, vielen Dank an unsere beiden Redner hier heute Abend für die wirklich stimulierenden Beiträge. Ich denke, das waren gute Beiträge auch für unsere Diskussion morgen, die wir haben werden. Und großen Applaus erstmal. Und damit möchte ich dann das Buffet eröffnen. Das ist hier draußen direkt. Und mit dem Hinweis, die morgige Veranstaltung wird auch hier in diesen Räumen stattfinden. Der Einlass ist um 9:30 Uhr und die Veranstaltung fängt an um 10:30 Uhr. Aber jetzt gehen wir über zum informellen Teil und auch etwas für den Magen.